I'd like to give you a preview of what you'll learn if you enroll in CS 50.11c, the Cascading Style Sheet course. Our lessons fall into two categories: sample pages and an online portfolio. Here are some examples of the samples you'll make. Here we're learning how to put text before and after content on our web page. This is a Google font sample, and here Amy has made a page that tells her what all the different selectors are and how to identify those selectors in CSS code. Here's an example of an online portfolio. Now, in creating the online portfolio, some of this is hand-coded, but some of it uses Bootstrap. And you'll hear me refer to Bootstrap quite often. This is a front-end development tool that has hundreds of classes that you can invoke, and when you use that class, all this pre-done CSS is automatically deployed at your site, so it can save you time and make you much more efficient. So let's go back to the portfolio. Do you see what just happened? The butterfly changed. Well, that's hand coding CSS background image swapping. That's a mouthful. But everything else you see here, this top navigation, the three columns where you have text, image, ooh, wasn't that fun? And more text. And then the three columns down here, all of that is Bootstrap template code that we learned from the very first week. And week by week, Amy added the new tricks of hand coding and Bootstrap to her portfolio, and that's what you'll do too. Here's a closer look at a sample page, again done by Amy Calhoun. She's listed all of the different selectors, and there's quite a few, and then right over here she's listed the code you use to invoke that selector, and then written herself a little explanation so she understands what she's doing. This may seem tedious as you do it, but it saves you so much time later on when you look at someone else's code and you see some symbols and you're not sure what they mean. This chart will help you every time. Here's another sample, and I like to call this the CSS magic. The only content in this entire sentence is the number 50. All of the other text before and after is done using CSS code. Is that slick or what? Here's a look behind the curtain. Here's a look behind the curtain. I have an H1 tag, and all it says is the number 50. But because I've learned CSS tricks, I can use the selector of an H1 tag with a class of age and do a pseudo element of before. Then I can add the content her age was. I can do a similar selector for after and put in the text years young. So her age was 50 years young. And that's what we see on the screen. So now let's turn our attention to a font face sampler, where we're able to use fonts that aren't on our visitor's local computer. This font was downloaded from FontSquirrel and stored at the student server in Amy's account. The next font is from Google, so when you see this text, it has contacted the Google server and displayed it on Amy's web page. We can also add shadow to text, transparent and opaque, with multiple shadows and even a kind of inset or beveled effect. Let's talk a little bit more about your portfolio. Here's my portfolio, the second week of class. I use a template from Bootstrap, and it looks pretty primitive, but week by week it really improves. Here I've added fonts to the website. I have a Google font right here and another right here. Even my logo gets to participate. This isn't an image, it's simply text. It uses a Google font, vertical alignment, and letter spacing to give this look. Now I've added images and the site looks a lot better. I've modified my logo so it's now a circle. That's simply border radius, another CSS trick. And I've done some fancy footwork with background images. The photo of me in the center is a background image. When I go into the content, it swaps out that image and puts in another. When I hover right over my picture, it turns into a circle. And that again is CSS border radius. So this is not a circular image, it's a square one that appears to be cropped into a circle. Want to see a few more CSS tricks? Let's scroll down. Here it appears that my website is zooming in, but it's just a CSS hover effect. And here we pan left to right. Now let's take a look at a portfolio you'll all build. This is my example of my work, and I've taken screenshots of some of the things I've done. The carousel moves with either forward and backward arrows using these little indicator buttons, or just sitting and waiting because it's on a timer and it will automatically start even if you don't click anything. Now let's get back to samples. Here I've learned how to make a shadow around an H1 tag up in the top and a div with a height and a width. That shadow has many different looks. It can be solid, blurred, transparent. You can have shadows on the left and the right. You can even make it look beveled or inset. We do a lot of hand coding, and then we do a bootstrap trick, and this is a perfect example. Here's a thumbnail gallery that's been hand coded. Here we've placed a border around an image, then we have padding, a border around the div, and then margin in between. All of this will be done by hand. These are bootstrap thumbnail image galleries. When I hover, notice what happens? I have a shadow. I have a slight rounded corner here. That's that border radius again. And I controlled this by using the bootstrap classes, but then I went in and modified it to be exactly what I wanted. So that's a theme you'll hear me talk about a lot. We're going to use Bootstrap, but we're going to customize it to meet our needs and the needs of our future clients. Here's another version of the gallery, and in this one we use CSS transform and transition values. Here I can rotate, skew, and scale, and then using transitions, see how that slowly comes out? That's animate, and I can also hide and show with transform. This is one of my favorite sample pages. It's hand-coded and it shows folks how to create a gradient. The white to medium gray here is just a CSS code to create a gradient. Then that's the first layer of background. There's another background layer with this blob or scribble, this gray image here that's layered right on top of the gradient. And then there's a third background image, which is a screenshot of my home page that's skewed. So 3 background images in one spot. Here we've got a little shadow around this area and some rounded corners. And then look, the text is tilted. How slick is that? You'll learn this trick also. Now you can apply this trick to your portfolio as Jacqueline did. Remember how I talked about having multiple backgrounds or swapping out backgrounds? Well, that's what we see here. When I hover, it turns the other way, and there's a sweet spot where you can see both profiles. Here you go. Now we're going to hand code menus. This is a list, and I've used CSS to display it as a horizontal navigation bar. I've added a little bit of padding, a border, and when I hover, both the text and the background color change. But I'm also going to add code to create a drop-down. Here we have hand coding again. This time, here you have vertical navigation. Again, it's a list, and we're using padding and a border and a hover color change. In some cases, we're also doing pop-out, which is the equivalent of drop-down I showed you a minute ago. Okay, these are the hand-coded examples. Now let's take a look at Bootstrap. The first thing we do is deal with tabs and something called pills. We'll add the justified feature, which allows them to fill the entire screen. However wide the screen is, that's how wide your nav bar is. Then we're going to add drop down. So whereas drop down was a lot of code in a previous demo, now you just add the class of drop down. Here you see how that behaves. It also works in pills, and then because you want to be able to control it, you will always be asked to customize it. So this is the tab menu you see here, but I have customized it. I've changed the border radius on the tab, changed the color, and when I hover and drop down, you see that I have color changes in my hover color and in the tab itself when I'm on that tab. We'll also learn about buttons. These are the standard colors for buttons, but because you know how to hand code in CSS, your button can be any color you like. We'll learn about stacking buttons to fill the screen or to fill a small area, on one on top of the other, and then we'll learn about making a button bar that again has a drop-down menu. Now on to nav bars. Here's a simple nav bar, and as we go down we see it gets a bit more complex. We have search boxes, drop downs, and then another set of navigation that pulls right, again with a drop down. Here it is in the standard default, here it is in inverse. All of these are Bootstrap standards, but I wanted to customize, so you can too. I've changed the size of the text here, and I've changed the color of the nav bar, the color of the active link, and of course when I drop down you'll see that again I've changed that. So it's all about learning how to make the Bootstrap classes work and then learning how to modify them to make them work the way you want. Here we are hand coding layout. This is a 3-column fluid. And watch what happens when I make the window for the browser smaller. Look at all 3 columns because they should all shrink. And they do. Yippee. We'll be hand coding about 10 different layouts, 2 and 3 column, fluid and fixed. But let's just look at one more, and that's the fluid in the center only. So the left and right will remain a fixed size and the middle will shrink and stretch. There we go, and there we go again. Now let's look at Bootstrap. Bootstrap uses a 12-grid system. Here we see all 12 grids in place. Here we see a 6 and 6, which is 2 even columns, 3 even columns, and the combinations are just limitless. Now let's see what happens as the screen gets smaller. Everything will shrink. Here we are at the size of a small laptop. Here it is as a tablet, and then when we get down to the size of a smartphone, everything stacks one on top of the other. And you didn't get that in the hand coding I showed you just a moment ago. So this is called responsive design, and it's really helpful. We'll be talking about responsive design in layout and in navigation, and Bootstrap comes in real handy. Here we have an example of using Bootstrap code to change the distribution of columns depending on the screen size. Up top, it's going to be 3 and 9 no matter how big or small the screen is. But this second example will be 3 and 9 when the screen is large, 4 and 8 when it's medium, 5 and 7 when it's small, and 6 and 6 when it's on a smartphone or extra small. Let's watch. Here we go at medium. See how it's already changed? Now we're at small, and here we are at extra small. Now at extra small, these two stacked, but because I told it to, it's going to be a 6-6 layout for extra small. Here's another Bootstrap sampler, and in this case we're going to hide or show things depending on the size of the browser window. Keep your eye on this text and also keep your eye on these columns. At the moment we have 2 blues, 2 grays, and 2 reds. Let's see what happens. As we get smaller, see how the text changed? Now it says medium screen, but we've still got 6 columns. As we go down to small, something changed. We still have 3 columns on top, but on the bottom we've hidden that 3rd red column. We've also changed the text to small screen. Now let's go to the size of a smartphone. Okay, we have text that says extra small. We have the original 3 columns that we had on top, but now we only have the center column from that 2nd row. So we've hidden the blue and the red. Here's my sample portfolio at the end, and I wanted to just show you again how that responsive design can come into play. Here's the screen at large. Here it is at medium, holding strong. And here it is at small. Now at small, look what happened. The left, center, and right columns are now stacked one on top of each other, and my 3 columns of examples have also stacked. We're going to go just a bit smaller and show you one more thing. Notice how my navigation has disappeared, and it's been replaced by these 3 horizontal lines. When I click on it, I can see my navigation that I had earlier, but it's a great way when your screen gets real small to condense your navigation into what is becoming a universal symbol, these 3 horizontal lines. Before we leave, I just have to show off samples of my students' work. So let's take a look. Here's a portfolio done by Amanda Smith. She again uses the Google fonts here and here. She's borrowed my trick on the logo, but it's slightly different. She's also using the 3-column look, but look at the effects she has. Here it blurs, here it turns to grayscale, and in this one it zooms in. So even though I've modeled the portfolio, there's lots of room for your own creativity. Here's Amber using the exact same template as before, but she decided to have a header area, to change to an oval, and then to put text on the right. She's also got these 3 columns, but again her effects are very different. Here it zooms in, skews to the left, and shrinks. Now let's take a look at Kim Johansson. He's used vertical alignment to make his text go up and down. Again, he's used a round logo. And in this case, when I hover, he just changes position. Here we are at Neil Livingston's portfolio, and you can see that he's placed the carousel right on the first page. I think this is a really effective way to showcase your work, and many folks are quite used to slideshows or carousels on the home page. At Neil's portfolio page, he chose to use that thumbnail gallery trick and repeat it here. So as I click, the larger version of the image displays in what we call a modal window. Then when I want to close it, I just select right here. This gives you just a taste of what you'll learn if you enroll in CS 50.11c, the Cascading Style Sheet class. I hope we see you there.